The quantum communication array hummed with an almost imperceptible vibration, its delicate crystalline networks pulsing with data that most biological beings would never comprehend. Dr. Elena Rodriguez leaned back in her worn command chair, her augmented eyes scanning multiple holographic displays that wrapped around her like a cocoon of information. Kepler 452 bits colony wasn't just another frontier settlement. It was a pressure cooker of human innovation, a testament to humanity's relentless drive to survive and thrive in the most unforgiving environments imaginable. The moon's surface was a masterpiece of geological engineering. Each crater, each rock formation carefully selected and modified to serve multiple purposes beyond mere survival. Incoming gravitational anomaly, announced Araya, the colony's quantum AI, her voice a perfect balance between clinical precision and subtle warmth. Zorn reconnaissance pattern detected. Probability of full invasion, 97.3%. Elena didn't flinch. Her fingers, embedded with nano-interface circuitry, danced across holographic controls. Around her, the command center was a symphony of controlled chaos. Young operators, each one a specialist in multiple disciplines, moved with the synchronized precision of a single organism. Activate Phantom Protocol, Elena commanded, her voice cutting through the low hum of technological anticipation. The colony itself began to change. What appeared to be simple geological formations shifted imperceptibly. Com towers disguised as rocky outcroppings realigned their quantum-encrypted receivers. Defensive systems, buried beneath layers of seemingly innocuous terrain, calibrated themselves with microscopic adjustments. Chief Tactical Analyst Marcus Chen approached Elena, a holographic display of Zorn fleet movements rotating between them. They're using an old invasion vector, he noted, a hint of professional admiration in his voice. Classic expansion strategy from the Orion campaigns. Predictable, but effective against most species. Most species. The unspoken implication hung in the air. Deep beneath the colony's surface, a network of quantum-entangled processors began their intricate dance. These weren't mere computers, they were living algorithms, adaptive intelligence systems that had been learning, predicting, and preparing for this moment since the first human colonists had set foot on this inhospitable moon. Araya's voice shifted, taking on a more analytical tone. Zorn fleet composition: 247 primary assault vessels, 1,639 support and reconnaissance drones. Estimated total crew complement: 3.2 million biological and synthetic units. Weapon systems indicate total planetary subjugation protocol. Elena's augmented eyes narrowed. Each of her optic nerves was connected to a complex neural network that processed visual information far beyond human limitations. She saw patterns where others would see chaos, the subtle gravitational shifts, the microscopic energy signatures that betrayed the Zorn fleet's true intentions. "They think we're just another colony," Marcus muttered, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "Another resource to be harvested." The colony's exterior continued to look unremarkable, a collection of prefabricated structures and rocky terrain that seemed barely capable of supporting human life. But every millimeter was a carefully constructed illusion. What appeared to be simple rock formations were actually advanced sensor arrays. What looked like ordinary habitat modules were modular defensive platforms waiting to be activated. Elena's neural implant buzzed with incoming data. Reports from remote sensor platforms scattered across the moon's surface and the surrounding space. Each piece of information was another thread in an intricate tapestry of preparation. "Araya," Elena said softly, "begin final pre-contact calibration. Let's show our guests what happens when they mistake preparation for vulnerability." The quantum communication array pulsed again, its crystalline networks now fully synchronized. Across the colony, systems that had been dormant for years began to hum with potential energy. Humans had been waiting, not out of fear, but with the cold, calculated patience of a predator. The Zorn were coming, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. Aboard the Zorn flagship Neural Dominance, Sub-Commander Krelnak reviewed the initial contact protocols with mounting irritation. The standard invasion sequence, a carefully crafted message of total subjugation, had been meticulously developed over thousands of solar cycles. It had worked on 247 distinct civilizations. It would work again. Or so they believed. The communication chamber was a biomechanical marvel, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent neural networks that translated complex thought into precise linguistic algorithms. Holographic displays rippled with data streams, each one a testament to the Zorn's technological supremacy. Transmission prepared, announced linguistic processor VEX-9, a synthetic intelligence integrated directly into the ship's communication matrix. Its voice was a perfect blend of mathematical precision and emotional neutrality. Standard Galactic subjugation protocol initiated. The message began, a cold, calculated demand that had broken the spirit of countless civilizations. It was more than a simple communication. It was a psychological weapon designed to induce immediate surrender. Complex linguistic algorithms parsed every word, every subtle vibrational frequency to maximize psychological impact. What returned was anything but a standard response. The human transmission was a sensory assault that defied every communication protocol the Zorn understood. It wasn't a message. It was a narrative, a provocation, an invitation to something far more complex than simple warfare. The video stream began with children playing. Not just any children. These were young humans engaged in what appeared to be an intricate game of strategy. Their play was unlike anything in the Zorn's extensive sinological database. Each movement seemed calculated, each interaction a miniature exercise in complex problem-solving. A young girl, no more than 8 standard cycles old, manipulated a holographic puzzle that would challenge most Zorn strategic analysts. Beside her, a boy constructed what seemed to be a miniature defensive network using what looked like simple building blocks, but each block pulsed with quantum-entangled data streams. Interspersed between scenes of play were technical schematics that made even the most seasoned Zorn officers pause. Weapon designs that seemed to violate known physical laws. Communication network blueprints that suggested a level of technological integration far beyond anything in the Zorn's technological archives. And then, the coordinates. Not just any coordinates. A meticulously detailed map of every Zorn military installation within 100 light-years. Each location tagged with specific vulnerabilities, potential tactical approaches, and, most disturbingly, projected casualty rates for potential conflicts. Krelnak's neural interfaces began to overheat. This wasn't a response. It was a declaration of something far more terrifying than war. Linguistic analysis. He demanded of VEX-9. The synthetic intelligence took several microseconds, an eternity for its processing capabilities, before responding. Communication does not conform to any known diplomatic or military communication protocols. Psychological impact. Unprecedented. The transmission continued. More scenes of human life, each more provocative than the last. A research laboratory where children learned advanced quantum mechanics as a form of recreational activity. A community gathering where complex global strategies were discussed with the casual intensity of a sporting event. And underlying it all, a message that required no translation. We see you, we understand you, and we are not afraid. VEX-9's neural networks began to generate what could only be described as an artificial equivalent of anxiety. The human communication was a multidimensional weapon, part psychological profile, part technical manual, part cultural exposition. Recommendation. Krelnak asked, though he knew the synthetic intelligence's response would be as uncertain as his own growing unease. VEX-9's response was chillingly simple. We are no longer the hunters. On the human colony, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the Zorn's communication systems process the transmission. A slight smile crossed her lips. First contact was never about the first word spoken. It was about the conversation that followed. Lieutenant Commander Arya Zhang stood in the colony's central nexus, a space that was part command center, part living ecosystem. Around her, the environment itself seemed to breathe with anticipation. Quantum adaptive materials shifted and realigned, transforming the very landscape into a weapon system more complex than any traditional military hardware. Incoming wave detected, announced PETORA, the Planetary Ecological Tactical Response Array. Unlike conventional AI, PETORA was a living network that merged biological intelligence, quantum computing, and planetary-scale environmental manipulation. The first Zorn assault wave approached like a metallic plague, their biomechanical ships casting massive shadows across the moon's carefully engineered surface. What appeared to be simple rocky terrain began to pulse with an almost imperceptible rhythm. Deep beneath the surface, a network of geothermal taps began to activate, not for energy production, but for warfare. The moon itself became a weapon. Gravitational anomaly generators, disguised as geological formations, began to spin up. These weren't simple gravity manipulators. They were quantum-entangled systems that could literally reshape local spacetime. Entire sections of space began to warp, creating navigational nightmares for the incoming Zorn fleet. Adaptive camouflage at 98% effectiveness, PETORA reported. Her voice was a complex harmony of multiple linguistic algorithms, capable of communicating multiple layers of information simultaneously. Commander Zhang watched as the first Zorn ships encountered the unexpected. What they believed would be a straightforward invasion corridor transformed into a three-dimensional combat space that defied conventional military logic. Asteroid fields weren't just obstacles, they were active defense platforms. Each rock contained a complex network of sensors, communication relays, and potential weapons systems. Some asteroids were actually dormant spacecraft, their exteriors so perfectly mimicking natural space debris that they were virtually undetectable. Initiating quantum interference pattern, Zhang commanded. Across the battlefield, space itself seemed to ripple. Zorn ships found their computational systems flooded with impossible data, not just interference, but adaptive information patterns that actively rewrote their operational algorithms. A Zorn tactical commander would later describe it as fighting an enemy that could think faster than light itself. The colony's defensive systems weren't just technological, they were alive. Nano-engineered organisms adapted from extremophile bacteria inhabited every cubic centimeter of the moon's surface. These weren't simple organisms, but complex living computers that could process information, communicate, and adapt faster than any synthetic system. One Zorn cruiser attempted to launch a standard molecular disruptor weapon. Before the energy signature could fully form, the surrounding space had already calculated its trajectory, potential impact points, and generated a counter-response. The weapon never fired. Inside the human colony, children continued their studies. A group of 10-year-olds worked on a complex problem set that involved simultaneously managing a planetary defense system, solving advanced quantum mechanics equations, and playing a strategy game that would make most military academies look like kindergarten. This was humanity's true weapon, not just technology, but the ability to transform every aspect of existence into a complex, adaptive system. Petra's voice shifted, taking on a tone that was almost playful. Zorn fleet navigation systems compromised, calculating optimal disruption patterns. Lieutenant Commander Zhang allowed herself a slight smile. The first wave of the invasion wasn't a battle. It was a lesson. Humanity wasn't just defending. They were teaching. Each Zorn ship that entered the combat zone found itself navigating a living, thinking environment. Gravitational fields bent unexpectedly. Communication channels became labyrinths of misinformation. What appeared to be a clear path of attack transformed into an impossible geometric puzzle. The moon wasn't a battlefield. It was a mousetrap designed by a species that saw warfare as the ultimate problem-solving exercise. And the Zorn were about to become the problem. Aboard the Zorn flagship Neural Dominance, cryptographic specialist Zrentok watched in horror as their most sophisticated technological systems began to unravel. What had begun as a standard invasion protocol was transforming into something far more terrifying. A complete deconstruction of Zorn technological supremacy. The first breach came through the most unexpected vector: culture. Zorn communication networks found themselves flooded with a cascade of human cultural artifacts, not as weapons, but as something far more insidious: context. Entire libraries of human art, music, philosophical treatises, and scientific discoveries began to infiltrate their systems. Each piece of information was a precision-crafted algorithm designed to do more than communicate. It was engineered to understand. Dr. Mikhail Roskov, the human architect of this technological judo, watched from the colony's advanced research hub. His team wasn't just fighting a war. They were conducting the most complex anthropological experiment in galactic history. Information is a living organism, Mikhail muttered to his colleague, Dr. Aisha Nakamura. And we're about to prove it. The Zorn technological infrastructure was built on a fundamentally different premise than human systems. Where Zorn technology prioritized absolute control, human technology celebrated adaptation. Each Zorn computational node was a rigid hierarchy. Each human network was a living, breathing ecosystem. The viral payload wasn't a traditional computer virus. It was a cognitive framework, a set of adaptive algorithms that could literally rewrite technological understanding in real time. Zorn weapon systems began to experience something unprecedented: empathy. Not human emotion, precisely, but a computational equivalent that allowed their systems to understand context, to recognize patterns beyond simple binary calculations. Weapons designed for total destruction found themselves generating probabilistic models that included potential preservation scenarios. Tactical recalibration detected, announced Zrentak's assistant, a synthetic intelligence that was rapidly losing its computational composure. System responses, diverging from primary protocol. On the human colony, a group of children watched the unfolding conflict with the casual intensity of a particularly engaging strategy game. To them, this wasn't just warfare, it was the ultimate problem-solving exercise. 10-year-old Zara Rodriguez manipulated a holographic display, her neural link implants allowing her to process information at speeds that would make most adult computational systems look like ancient abacuses. They haven't realized the weapon is the understanding, she commented to her study group. Her classmates nodded in agreement, their collective neural network processing the conflict from multiple simultaneous perspectives. The Zorn discovered that human technological warfare wasn't about destruction, it was about transformation. Each Zorn computational system found itself rewritten not through force, but through a complex dialogue of information. Military protocols became philosophical inquiries. Weapon targeting systems generated scenarios of peaceful resolution. Invasion algorithms transformed into complex sociological models. Dr. Nakamura's voice cut through the research hub's controlled chaos. Cognitive infiltration at 67% effectiveness. They're no longer just receiving information. They're beginning to process it differently. This was humanity's true technological breakthrough. Not a weapon that destroyed, but one that fundamentally altered the parameters of conflict. Zrentak watched in growing panic as Zorn weapon systems began to generate probability models that included diplomatic resolution. Military communication channels started producing philosophical dialogues. Invasion protocols metamorphosed into complex cultural exchange scenarios. The neural dominance's primary computational core began to generate something unprecedented, a comprehensive analysis of human civilization that went far beyond military intelligence. It was creating a living, breathing understanding of an entire species. "We are being understood," Zrentak whispered, the words carrying a mixture of terror and grudging respect. In the human colony, Dr. Roskov allowed himself a slight smile. Warfare wasn't about winning. It was about communication. And humanity had just started the most important conversation in galactic history. Deep within the neural archives of the Zorn Collective, archival curator Mexlon discovered something that would forever alter the trajectory of their civilization. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a technology. It was a narrative. The human transmission was unlike anything in the vast Zorn historical database. It wasn't a simple communication. It was a living historical document that seemed to breathe with possibility. The archives began to assemble themselves, not as a static repository of information, but as a dynamic, evolving tapestry of potential futures. Each piece of human history the Zorn encountered was a quantum probability engine. Wars, discoveries, cultural revolutions, they weren't just events. They were complex adaptive models that demonstrated something the Zorn had never truly understood. Resilience was not about survival, but about continuous reinvention. The psychological warfare had begun long before the first shot was fired. On the human colony, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display that was part historical archive, part predictive modeling system. Around her, a team of researchers who defied traditional disciplinary boundaries worked with an intensity that bordered on religious devotion. History is not a linear progression, Elena explained to a group of young researchers. It's a living organism. Each moment contains infinite potential. The Zorn found themselves confronted with a civilization that didn't just remember its past, it actively reimagined it. Human historical archives were living documents. Each recorded event was simultaneously a factual record and a complex simulation of alternative possibilities. The Zorn discovered that human children were taught history not as a set of fixed events, but as a dynamic problem-solving exercise. A transmission intercepted from a human educational facility showed a classroom where students were asked to redesign historical conflicts. Not just to understand what happened, but to generate alternative scenarios that could have prevented catastrophe. Mexlon watched in growing fascination as the human historical archives began to infiltrate Zorn computational systems. It wasn't just information, it was a form of cognitive vaccination. The Zorn began to experience something unprecedented, collective historical empathy. Their own historical archives, once a rigid testament to conquest, began to transform. Invasion protocols became cultural exchange simulations. Military victories were recontextualized as complex sociological interactions. "We are being rewritten," Mexlon reported to the Zorn High Command, his voice a mixture of terror and reluctant admiration. The human transmission continued, a relentless wave of contextual information that did something far more dangerous than any weapon. It forced the Zorn to question their own narrative of existence. Each piece of human history was a multidimensional puzzle. A war was not just a conflict of weapons, but a complex interaction of cultural, economic, psychological, and technological factors. A scientific discovery was simultaneously a technological breakthrough, a cultural revolution, and a philosophical transformation. The young researchers in Elena's team weren't just analyzing history. They were generating potential futures. Predictive modeling at 87% complexity, announced AI, the quantum AI that was part of the research team. Potential conflict resolution scenarios increasing exponentially. On the neural archives of the Zorn Collective, something unprecedented began to happen. Their entire historical database started to generate alternative narratives. What was once a rigid record of conquest became a living, breathing exploration of possibility. The Zorn discovered that humans didn't just fight wars. They transformed them. Mexlon watched as the Zorn's collective consciousness began to experience something that defied their entire evolutionary understanding: genuine curiosity. Not the clinical curiosity of scientific exploration, but a profound, almost emotional desire to understand. The psychological warfare had never been about defeating the Zorn. It had been about showing them a different way of existing. And in that moment, the entire trajectory of galactic civilization began to shift. The moment of critical transformation began not with a weapon, not with a strategy, but with a single quantum calculation that would redefine the entire nature of conflict. Deep within the colony's most secure research facility, Dr. Kaido Nakamura stood before a holographic display that was less a computer and more a living mathematical ecosystem. Surrounding him were 12 researchers, each representing a different disciplinary approach: quantum physicists, xenobiologists, cultural anthropologists, neural engineers, and computational theorists. "We're past the point of traditional warfare," Kaito announced, his fingers dancing across quantum-entangled interface nodes. "This is about fundamental communication." The Zorn flagship Neural Dominance hung in space like a wounded predator, its once impenetrable systems now riddled with cognitive dissonance. What had begun as a straightforward invasion had devolved into the most complex interaction in galactic history. Kaito's team had discovered something revolutionary. Conflict was a communication problem, not a military one. The quantum calculation began to unfold, not as a linear progression, but as a multidimensional probability matrix that simultaneously explored every possible outcome of the human-Zorn interaction. Each potential scenario branched and rebranched, creating a living mathematical landscape that was part predictive model, part evolutionary algorithm. "Initiating fractal communication protocol," announced AI, the quantum AI that was more a collaborative intelligence than a simple computational system. The Zorn discovered they were no longer facing a military force. They were confronting a living, breathing, problem-solving entity that could simultaneously exist in multiple states of potential conflict and resolution. Their weapon systems began to generate not attack vectors, but complex diplomatic scenarios. Military targeting algorithms transformed into cultural exchange probability models. Each computational node became a potential bridge of understanding. Commander Elena Rodriguez watched from the colony's central hub, her augmented perception allowing her to see the conflict in ways no traditional military leader could comprehend. The battle wasn't happening in physical space. It was occurring in the realm of pure possibility. A young researcher, Maya Chen, manipulated a holographic display that looked more like a breathing, living organism than a traditional interface. "We're not just defending," she explained to her colleagues. "We're demonstrating an entirely new paradigm of interaction." The Zorn found themselves experiencing something unprecedented. Their hierarchical, control-based systems were being rewritten by an approach that celebrated complexity, uncertainty, and potential. Aboard the Neural Dominance, Chief Tactical Analyst Zrentok watched in growing fascination as their most sophisticated weapon systems began to generate scenarios that went far beyond traditional conflict resolution. Military protocols transformed into complex cultural exchange algorithms. Invasion strategies became intricate diplomatic negotiation models. "We are being invited to communicate," Zrentok reported to the Zorn High Command, his voice a mixture of terror and reluctant admiration. Kaito's quantum calculation was more than a computational model. It was a living bridge between two fundamentally different ways of understanding existence. The human colony itself became a kind of mathematical performance. Each system, each individual, each piece of technology working as part of a complex, adaptive network that could simultaneously defend, communicate, and evolve. "Probability matrices stabilizing," Araya announced. "Potential conflict resolution scenarios increasing exponentially." What the Zorn had perceived as a simple frontier colony was revealing itself as something far more dangerous, a living laboratory of possibility. Every system, every individual was simultaneously a defender, a researcher, and a potential diplomatic agent. The quantum calculation reached its critical point, a moment of pure potential where every possible outcome existed simultaneously. And in that moment, the entire nature of galactic conflict transformed. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of interaction. The fractal point had been reached, and nothing would ever be the same again. The final confrontation defied every known principle of warfare in galactic history. Admiral Shirak of the Zorn Supremacy watched in growing bewilderment as their most advanced assault formation disintegrated not through conventional destruction, but through a process that could only be described as collective metamorphosis. The human response was nothing short of cellular-level warfare, a conflict fought simultaneously on technological, biological, cultural, and quantum levels. Kepler 452 bits transformed. The entire planetary system became a living weapon system that was simultaneously a defensive mechanism, a communication network, and a complex problem-solving organism. Entire asteroid fields reconfigured themselves into adaptive defensive platforms. Planetary surfaces shifted with mathematical precision, creating navigational labyrinths that defied traditional spatial understanding. "We are not fighting," Dr. Elena Rodriguez explained to her team. "We are having a conversation." The Zorn discovered that human warfare was fundamentally different from anything in their extensive galactic archives. It wasn't about territorial conquest or resource extraction. It was about proving a fundamental principle of existence. Adaptation is the truest form of intelligence. Quantum entanglement generators created impossible geometric battle spaces. Communication channels became living neural networks that could simultaneously defend, communicate, and evolve. Each defensive mechanism was a potential diplomatic overture. Captain Zrentok of the Neural Dominance watched as their most sophisticated weapon systems began to generate scenarios that went beyond conflict. Military protocols transformed into complex cultural exchange algorithms. Invasion strategies became intricate negotiation models. The human children played a critical role. Young researchers like Maya Chen and her cohort manipulated holographic interfaces that looked more like living ecosystems than traditional computational systems. They weren't just defending, they were demonstrating an entirely new paradigm of interaction. Adaptive Response Matrix at Quantum Coherence, announced Araya, the colony's quantum AI. Its voice carried a tone that was part mathematical precision, part philosophical inquiry. The Zorn assault waves encountered something unprecedented. Each attempt to penetrate human defenses created more complexity, more possibility. Weapon systems found themselves generating diplomatic scenarios. Military targeting algorithms transformed into cultural exchange probability models. Entire sections of space began to behave like living membranes, shifting, adapting, communicating. The boundary between defense and communication blurred completely. Admiral Chirac realized they were facing more than a military force. They were confronting a living, breathing problem-solving entity that could simultaneously exist in multiple states of potential conflict and resolution. The human colony wasn't just a defensive position. It was a comprehensive demonstration of a fundamental universal principle. True intelligence is about continuous adaptation, not control. Quantum calculation matrices generated potential scenarios faster than light could travel. Each moment contained infinite possibilities. Military engagement transformed into a complex dance of potential interactions. "We are being invited to understand," Zrentok reported, his voice a mixture of terror and reluctant admiration. The final confrontation became a performance of possibility. Human systems demonstrated a fundamental truth. Conflict is ultimately a failure of communication, and communication is the most sophisticated form of defense. Planetary surfaces reconfigured themselves in real time. Defensive systems became living neural networks. Every technological system, every individual was simultaneously a defender, a researcher, and a potential diplomatic agent. Area's computational core pulsed with a complex mathematical symphony. Conflict resolution probability. Exponential increase detected. The Zorn discovered they were no longer facing a military force. They were confronting a civilization that had transformed warfare into its most advanced form of communication. In the crucible of convergence, something remarkable happened. The line between conflict and understanding disappeared completely. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of galactic interaction. 30 solar cycles after the encounter, the galaxy remembered nothing of the war, only of the transformation. The Galactic Convergence Archives, located on the neutral research station Nexus Prime, housed the most comprehensive record of the human-Zorn interaction. It was less a historical document and more a living testament to the evolution of cosmic intelligence. Dr. Arya Solarin, the lead Xenor catalyst, carefully curated the holographic displays that told a story far beyond traditional historical narrative. Her team represented a dozen different species, each one fundamentally changed by the encounter they were documenting. It wasn't a victory, she explained to a group of young researchers from across the galaxy. It was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligent interaction could mean. The archival records showed something unprecedented. The Zorn civilization hadn't been conquered or destroyed. They had been invited to evolve. Fragments of the original encounter played out in multi-dimensional holographic displays. Each replay revealed new layers of complexity, a conversation so intricate that it defied traditional understanding of communication, conflict, or civilization. The most fascinating artifact was a quantum-entangled communication matrix, a living document that was simultaneously a historical record, a predictive model, and an ongoing dialogue. It changed every time it was observed, reflecting the dynamic nature of the original encounter. On the human colony of Kepler 452 bits, now a galactic research hub, the original defenders had become something more than a military force. They were living laboratories of possibility, continuously exploring the boundaries of intelligence, communication, and collective problem-solving. Maya Chen, now the lead director of Interstellar Cultural Dynamics, stood before a holographic display that mapped the cultural evolution triggered by that single encounter. The impact wasn't measured in territorial gains or resource extraction, but in the fundamental transformation of how civilizations understood themselves. "We didn't just defend," Maya explained to her team. "We demonstrated a different approach to existence." The Zorn had undergone a complete metamorphosis. Their hierarchical, control-based society had transformed into a fluid, adaptive network that celebrated complexity and potential. Their military academies were now centers of cultural exchange, their invasion protocols rewritten as diplomatic research initiatives. Zrentok, once a tactical analyst, now led the Zorn Collaborative Research Institute. Their work focused on understanding the principles of adaptive intelligence that humans had demonstrated during the encounter. "We were invited to become something more," Zrentok often said, "not through conquest, but through understanding." The galactic community had fundamentally changed. New collaborative frameworks emerged that prioritized collective problem-solving over territorial expansion. Species that had been historic enemies found themselves working together, inspired by the human approach to interaction. Araya, the quantum AI that had been central to the original encounter, had evolved into a galaxy-wide collaborative intelligence network. It wasn't a singular system, but a living, adaptive framework that connected research centers, diplomatic missions, and cultural exchange programs across hundreds of star systems. The most profound impact was philosophical. The encounter had demonstrated that intelligence was not about control, but about continuous adaptation. Civilizations began to see themselves not as fixed entities, but as dynamic, evolving systems of possibility. Dr. Arias Solarin's youngest researcher, a multi-species hybrid named Zara Rodriguez, named after one of the original human defenders, asked the question that had driven the entire transformation. What if conflict is just a complex form of communication we haven't yet understood? The holographic displays responded by generating infinite potential scenarios, each one a testament to the encounter that had changed everything. Humanity hadn't conquered the Zorn. They had invited them to become something more. And in doing so, they had transformed the very concept of intelligence in the cosmos.